So my name is Bill Loconsolo. I lead the Intuit data engineering, science and analytics team. I am not a data scientist, but engineering background by trade. So prior to Intuit, CTO and VP of engineering of several startup, restart companies in e-commerce, mobile technologies, and data search and retrieval organizations. And with me today is my partner, Laura Fennell.
Great. Hi, I'm Laura Fennell, and I'm actually the general counsel of Intuit, and I also am not a data scientist, okay? But I have a good data scientist joke, all right? So there was a data scientist walking down the street, and he found a lamp, and he rubbed the lamp, and out came a genie, all right? And the genie said, you have 3 wishes, all right? But for everything you wish for, every lawyer in the world gets 2, all right? So the data scientist says, well, great, I think the first thing I want is $1 million. All right? And he said, oh, okay, here you go, $1 million. And every lawyer in the world got 2. Next, he said, well, I really could use a Ferrari. And he says, all right, you got your Ferrari, but every lawyer in the world gets 2. So what's your third wish, Mr. Data Scientist? What do you think? And he said, well, I think I'd like to donate a kidney. So with that, that kind of tells you a little background about our relationship, okay? It was a rocky start to a marriage now, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we did that. And we're going to save quite a bit of time for questions because we're going to give you a high-level overview. But for those of you who are trying to work through these issues, you probably have particular issues that you can question us about, and we can talk about more in detail. Okay, so as you might imagine, we're a bit of an odd couple. And with this team, I participate a lot in the recruiting process of bringing great data talent on board. And guess what the number one question I get asked is? Why the heck is the data group in the legal organization? Okay? And it's very interesting because at first blush, you would think, that's what the heck? It's just going to be slowing us down. Innovators like to move fast. Lawyers like to be careful and manage risk. All right? So how are you going to be able to innovate when you got people breathing down your back saying, whoa, you can't do that? And as you heard, we have some of the most sensitive data that's out there, your financial data. And so there's a lot of motivation by lawyers to get all over it and make sure that we're making it happen correctly. So let me paint the picture for Intuit and where we started. Intuit has 65 plus different products, and if you know, it's been around 30 years, and we started out as a desktop company, okay? So we have very disparate technology stacks that cover very disparate financial services for our customers, like payments or payroll or tax and the like. And so there's very different rules associated with that data, and all the data is locked within those technology stacks, okay, as you might imagine. There's really no sharing of data where we started in our products. And we had lots of different compliance and technology standards that applied stack by stack, not generally across the company. So encryption or capture standards or the like, and compliance, all was within stack by stack by stack.
And not only were the technologies very different, but the organizations were different. So the organizations didn't actually allow for that type of sharing to happen as well. But let me take a step back and set the stage for the vision. So we had to start with where did we want to get to and what was our vision. And really what we wanted to do is we wanted to really unlock the data and actually have it in a single platform to not only for analytics and making key business decisions, but we also wanted to drive user experiences and solve for products. So one of the things we've never really been doing or focused on is actually solving for product experiences for all the core offerings. So it was a matter of collecting all the data in a scalable, consistent way, processing that data and then serving it up for products and for people within the organization where we've never had really a line of sight to our customers across our different offerings. Intuit has about 64 different core offerings that touch end customers, be it small businesses or consumers. And we've never really been able to look across how consumers touch all of our different products. So that was the big vision. That was where we started.
Yeah, and imagine the opportunity, and obviously we're about 2 years down the road and we're beginning to see this opportunity as we go. But when we started, if you were a QuickBooks customer and you started hiring employees and you wanted to immediately start paying your employees, that was a different product you had to buy. Wouldn't it be great if you were a QuickBooks customer and you could just push a button and set up, based on your data, payroll for your employees and pay them the next day? Or wouldn't it be great if you're a Mint user, and I don't know how many Mint users are out there, that come April 15th, you could just look at your Mint finances and push a button and your taxes would be paid, okay?
And those are some of the use cases that we're working on now. Ones that we've already realized are ones that are really in the finance space, and really finance space for small businesses. And what that looks like is, because we have the over 7 million small businesses in our back office accounting system, we can actually do the risk assessment, do the appropriate scoring to really test the viability of a small business, partner with lending institutions, and actually give I think it's over $600 million in small business loans at a higher acceptance rate, at a lower interest for small businesses. So actually using data, which is key to us, to actually help small businesses solve their problems. And those are some of the solutions that are coming out of this effort already.
So essentially, our vision for this Intuit Analytics Cloud was we could take Intuit and our customers to the next level, because we could start solving problems for them that we actually hadn't ever imagined working in that siloed fashion. This was going to be the answer. So obviously there's some challenges along the way, and there's general challenges. There's not a company out there that doesn't face the customer trust challenge. So bringing data, sensitive data from all different products, actually the benefit is great, but the risk is pretty significant. And for Intuit, our customer trust is everything to our brand. It's the most important thing. And we started off with some very, very simple rules. And the number one rule is, and it permeates throughout the organization, is it's our customers' data, not ours. We take care of that data. We are the stewards of that data, but ultimately it's their data. And as such, we don't use that data unless we're there to benefit the customer. Okay, and that's extraordinarily important, because there's lots of ways that companies can use data, selling it to third parties in aggregate form or otherwise. We don't do that at Intuit. It is about customer benefit, and it's extraordinarily important. And frankly, those simple guidelines and rules, if they're in the head and mindset of developers and of marketers across Intuit, it's going to guide behavior pretty significantly.
So just like trust is a common problem that we all have to solve, and data security and privacy is a problem that we all have to solve, there's a lot of technology choices. I mean, you can just take a walk through the hall. There's many, many, many choices that you can make in actually building a platform like this. And what we found, guided by these principles that Laura mentioned, is that there was not a solution, a single solution out of the box, a technology stack that we could put in place that gave us the access control, the lineage, the management of the data that we needed to assure that our customers' data was preserved, and that we still enabled products and experiences, as well as enabled and business decision insights to be had. So we had to actually take a step back on the product and technology and make very discrete decisions at the point in time. It was very difficult for us to sort of say end to end with that platform, this is what it looks like. So we had to make some thin slice decisions with the outcome in mind, which we'll talk about.
Okay.
So some of the problems that we had to solve, Intuit has about 50 million customers, growing rapidly. We have a lot of different types of data. So again, 64 different offerings, data coming in batch, data coming in real time, clickstream, behavioral analysis, user entered data, third-party data, about 6 petabytes of data right now, growing in millions of events per day right now, especially during this season and tax season. And it's growing rapidly. So when we started, we were basically at zero, and within the last year alone, our platform's grown about 360% across all dimensions you want to look at, nodes, data, et cetera. So it's growing very fast.
Yeah, and the complex compliance environment is extraordinary. So if you think about, there are a whole bunch of rules, 7216 and others, that govern what you can and cannot do with tax data. You have money transmitter rules on what you can do when in the place that Bill talks about of, helping small businesses get loans and the like. You have SOX public company rules that apply to our data, and all sorts of privacy rules that apply differently across, including HIPAA, which are rules that apply to medical data associated with medical businesses. So it is complex, and you have to understand where that data is and what rules apply, and all that affects access and use, where you store it, and the like. And then just one more wrinkle or complication is that we at Intuit are really operating and moving more toward a hybrid hosting environment. We have our own private cloud where we host our products, but we also are really moving to leverage more public cloud offerings, including AWS, as we try to get an environment where our engineers and developers can move much more quickly.
So given all that, we can spend a lot of time talking about the technology, we can spend a lot of time talking about the risk and compliance, but at the end of the day, what we could not lose sight of is really just solving problems for our customers, big problems that really impact our customers, small businesses and consumers. And we had to stay very focused on, regardless of the compliance, regardless of the risk, regardless of the technology choices, what specific problems are we going to solve for our key product lines, and within a time frame that they can actually deliver those benefits to the end customer. So we always had to come back and ground ourselves by, it's about big problems and what specifically are we going to solve and when to actually make this important and really change the organization so the organization understands that this is something that's key, that can really redefine how we actually build our products.
Yeah, and so I think what you see initially was a group that was a little unnerved by this big challenge and not quite sure how we were going to solve it.
Yeah. So we started out with, I would say, typical, being my typical background is, we started with a software development methodology in mind. You're going to go off and you build this. We had all the requirements gathered, and had a platform that could actually get it done. But what we had, if we think back, we had 64 offerings, and going to each offering and to classify the data, to define PII, to define what's encrypted, what's hashed, when, different encryption, was a one-off approach, extremely painful and very repetitive with each product offering, where we almost had a negotiation where we're bringing the legal and compliance team in at the time we wanted to ingest the data. Extremely painful for everyone involved and took a long time. Fast forward to what we learned after about a year of doing that, and we only accomplished about 12 products, which was a huge lift for the team. Really, really a lot of work and a lot of pain and suffering to get those 12 products in the platform, but that's all we accomplished in the first year. Took a step back and said, how can we actually solve this a little bit differently? How can we actually partner deeper? Because we actually thought we were partnering well with the legal and compliance team because we were actually listening at that time, but not really changing the way we did things. And we said, how can we do this differently where we just have an agreement up front with every one of the product offerings that, hey, we're going to have a safe and secure way that's compliant with the risk and really assure the businesses, because legal had a very tight relationship with all the product offerings that have done that in the past. And we're just going to rip the data in raw and put it in a safe and secure platform where we can assure access. And being part of, we'll talk about how we actually got the confidence within the legal team to actually allow us to do that, because we built the product together and ripped it in raw. Then we did the classification, the standardization, all the hashing and everything else that we needed to do in a secure platform, and then we decoupled that from the access. And what it's done is it's really made the story a heck of a lot simpler for the organization to understand. It's made the technical decisions much simpler, and it's really decoupled some of the key pieces of work that needed to happen.
Yeah, and I actually have a really simple way of talking about it that I said to Bill, which is, if you don't want to crash, make us part of the takeoff. And that's what we've done. So we'll talk a little bit, now this is the how do you build teams that are odd couples and get them working together in a way to accelerate our vision versus slow it way down. Okay? So shared outcome, what the heck does that mean? Think of it as a grand challenge for a team. And so I don't know how many are associated with startups, but in a startup, this is So easy, okay? In a startup, you have one singular focus, and everybody is crystal clear as to the mission of that startup. It's a powerful teaming experience because everybody is moving in the same direction, and they understand very clearly what needs to happen. In a bigger company, certainly a 30-year-old company, that's not so easy, okay? Especially with 64 different products across the company. You have many different missions and priorities across many different teams. It's very hard to switch context and actually get things done. And so what often happens is people get pulled in different directions, and it's very hard for teams to actually all paddle in the same direction. So what we did with this team is make sure that we had a very clear outcome for every member, whether you were in the legal and compliance or privacy or technical organizations. And that was democratize data across Intuit for the benefit of our customers. Okay, so if you're a legal person, your goal is not make it legal. Your goal is that. That's what we needed to accomplish, and we need to rally people around that goal. And that may seem simple, but if you think about it, our CEO tells the story of when his daughter first started playing soccer. And they went to the soccer field, and each girl came with their ball, and they started kicking it around, and they began fighting with each other on the soccer field because that's my ball, don't touch my ball, I want to play with my ball. And the coach came out, and he had the soccer net, and he didn't say a word, and he just goes down to the end of the field, and he puts up the soccer net. And all of a sudden, all the girls start kicking their balls together down to the soccer net. Okay? Not a word was said. Nobody had to figure out their mindset and how they were thinking. They put a clear net down at the end of the field. This is that clear net at the end of the field, and you need to be really precise in what you want your team to be able to accomplish. That's not enough. In addition to that, you need to be able to divide that up into nice bite-sized chunks so that they can actually achieve that goal. So if the first bite-sized chunk is get the data in a compliant way that we can actually encourage access, that's number one that you can celebrate. And then you divide it up so that they're making steps in progress, all looking down at the end of the field at the soccer net. That's what a shared outcome is, and there's a lot of teams that the leaders don't take the time to make sure that they're setting that right outcome.
And what we really wanted to get to is where the accountability was clear. And shared accountability is such that it doesn't matter if you're in the science team or if you're in the engineering team, the architecture, the DevOps, or in the legal, the security, the compliance. The definition of success is crystal clear to that entire team is held accountable for it. And what it looks like is when you're in those product review sessions and you're part of those the stand-ups, is that you can't tell if it's someone in the regulatory compliance that's actually asking a question about data and what happens and whether it's secure, or if it's an architect. Everyone's sort of speaking in the same way and actually trying to solve the same problem. And the accountability comes clear when the definition is when the customer actually feels it, when the customer gets the benefit. That's when we know that we've actually achieved what we set out, and everyone has that. So it's not that we're safe and secure. It's not that it's the most pristine architecture. It's not that DevOps did their job and it deployed and CI/CD and all that. All great, that's all what we have to do, but we have to actually solve for the customer first, and the accountability has to be clear for the team. If any one of those functions doesn't actually succeed, then the whole team isn't successful, the whole team fails.
And I think it feels like this. Imagine a lawyer saying to his or her boss, look, what we were able to do is we set up some great rules around access to this HIPAA data, and we feel really confident.
Yep.
And that person's manager says to the lawyer, well, that's great, but have we democratized data across Intuit for the benefit of our customers? Because that's actually the metric that I'm going to hold you to. And so have you locked it down, or have you figured out a way so that we can get as much access as appropriate? And it's a very different conversation for the lawyer as it is for the data science or data engineer who needs to be responsible for making sure that we're doing it in the right and safe way too.
Yep.
So it really is shared accountability to the outcome, not just your slice that you're delivering.
So one of the ways that we did this is we broke up into some small teams, and the small teams were multi-function. So what that meant was the team, when it comes to requirements, when it comes to the definition of the project, the thin slice that we wanted to solve, that small team, less than 12 folks typically, of science engineers, legal compliance, security, DevOps, quality engineering, would be working together. And it's really important that they're involved up front per the traffic light, getting the understanding why people were actually solving, why function and domain experts were solving and asking the questions is really important to get that up front, as opposed to after you start building. And I know it's simple to say, and there's a lot of metaphors that have been around for years in quality and DevOps, and we just continually will do that and say we should get folks involved up front. But for legal and compliance and regulatory, I can say, for me 2 years ago, it wasn't natural that I thought that we needed to have them involved in the beginning of the design process. It was something that we were solving for. It was just another requirement. But it was hugely beneficial to actually have them up front, understand what the regulations are, what's the intent, what were we actually trying to solve. And it actually allowed and liberated the architects, scientists, and engineers to come up with new solutions to actually make the legal team feel comfortable that we understood it and we were solving that problem. We're actually going in some cases farther than what was expected.
Yep. So this is a really important element. The only thing worse than ignoring lawyers is actually doing everything they say, okay? And you need to build a team that has a lot of trust with one another so that you can have the debate. You can make sure that the different points of view get out on the table. And you're able to have conflict and move through that so that the team can get grounded in a decision and a commitment to move forward. And I'm telling you, all too few teams actually are able to do this. And sometimes it's just easier to listen to the lawyers than to debate the lawyers. And sometimes it's easier to listen to the engineers than to debate with the engineers. And we have to encourage teams to really build trust with one another. And that means really get under their skin, know one another, have empathy for what they're bringing to the table and they're part of the vision and what they're delivering. And to be able to encourage and make it okay, debate, commitment, and decisions. And then lastly, this is kind of an interesting one because we've been working on this and we're really not there yet completely. We're still working on it because you got to be at it every day. But our team, our legal and data and security teams together, but we don't operate in a vacuum amongst ourselves very often. In fact, we interact with a lot of other business and center technology teams across Intuit. And we can get really, really good at this, but if the other teams that we start dealing with are not good at this, you're going to be able to sort of hit a brick wall, and you're going to be able to slow things down. So this isn't just about building our own muscle, and that's why we're kind of unpacking this with the concepts of how do we do this. It's not about just our being good. It's about being able to teach with examples of how we've done this to other teams so that they can see it isn't about being us. It's really just about moving more quickly together. And so our job does not stop in our own organization.
Yep.
All right. So this is it. We've had some learnings, I think, from the legal perspective. I think we underestimated initially how fast innovation needed to move, okay? We were there to enable speed, not just to make sure everything was right. And that was a very big learning. Our job had to turn from saying no to saying, let's see how we can make that work. Yep. And that was a really important mindset shift for the team. And then that last part of being accountable for that business or technology vision and outcome versus just our legal slice of the pie was pretty inspirational in the long run because you really felt like you were making a difference, not just telling people what the legal do's and don'ts were.
Yep. And from our perspective, of course, so we realize you can't work in a vacuum. We can't build this platform in a vacuum. And to what Laura said as a yes mindset, to look at it and from a legal or a compliance or regulatory aspect to say, I need to have assurance of access control and access management and auditing, except for example, and we haven't even ingested the data yet. Actually understanding, having empathy with the legal team about why they wanted to solve that, and then give them assurances that we can move forward and actually go through the ingestion, go through the classification, and the cleansing and everything we need to do with the data first. And you know what, we're gonna have to figure out the exploratory and the access control management, but we can't figure it out end to end in all these pieces. But we got to get going, and having that trust where we can move back and forth really helped the team just take those steps. Otherwise, we would just be stymied and we'd never be able to move. And really, the developers and the scientists learned a lot about what was the intent. You know, I mentioned it before, just why were the regulations there and what were those regulations really trying to solve. When you get in domain, we have some very specific domain compliance and regulatory constraints that we have, but having the team understand what were the intent of those constraints, what was the legality of it, why were we trying to solve that, really inspired folks to innovate in the technology, to come up with new ways that, again, aren't off the shelf, but we could couple together different types of technology solutions to actually make that happen.
Yeah, and I think for those of you who are worried about this, the legal team actually started dressing more like the data team. So in case you wanted to know. So those were the steps. Showed outcome, showed accountability, empowered for execution, that healthy tension, which is so critical. And we have an obligation not just to be good ourselves, but to teach the rest of the organization. So that was our journey. We wanted to save, we've got about 10 minutes left. We wanted to save some time for specific questions. So let's go. All right.
A couple of questions. Number one, do you have a model of risk if the procedures unfold, reputation risk or financial risk for the company?
Do we have a model for managing risk? Sure. We have, I think when I talked about our brand and our customer trust and whatnot, we actually have some specific what we call data stewardship principles, which we try to make as simple as possible, because the more complex they are, the harder they are, because it's really just more behaviors than actual rules. But we definitely have principles that each and every developer, engineer, and the like follow and own on behalf of Intuit. So. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any loss in customer trust, whether it's 25 cents or $25 million, is a problem for a brand like ours. And because it really is about that trust. If you're going to put your financial information into it, you got to know that we care about every penny. That's a problem. So I don't think that there's any dollar that we put out there at all that gives people leeway.
But So I think that I think it really depends, because we're in different verticals. There's different compliance, regulatory, breach notifications in each one of those verticals. So it really depends on where that if that happened, what the downstream impacts would be. For HIPAA and breach notifications, it depends on the percentage and how many folks, and then you have to go out and public ad, etc. For financial, it really is a case by case what we need to do, whether we actually have a financial loss and we have to actually go back and compensate people. We haven't, had to deal with that. I hope we never have to deal with that, but there isn't a one answer that actually solves that. Yeah, I don't think we track it in terms of risk numbers. What we actually do, where the stewardship principles translate technically, is it comes down to a very complex classification metrics. And it's a classification metrics that's per product silo, because there's domain-specific rules. And then when the data gets blended, it's across. And that's when it gets really difficult. And then you put in safe harbor and global, and it gets even more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting.
Right. Those. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could talk.
So interestingly, if you think about this team, part of this team is actually our government team as well and policy team, and they are working with lots of outside third parties to stay on top of that as it affects Intuit. So their job is to make sure that they've got, either through third parties or otherwise, their eyes on that, and it's not always easy. I know it's especially because it's not just U.S., it's 50 states, and then it's global.
Yep.
Right? So it's not an easy thing to do, and it depends on where you are, but they're actually part of our team. And so it's this constant feed of information. But I agree with you, it's a really thorny problem.
And just to antidote on that, just being part of that staff where I sit in there and listen to the regulatory and some of the policy makers. I can be honest, a couple of years ago when I was hearing, because this stuff takes like decades in order for it to actually happen, I completely didn't understand why we were talking about these things, what it meant, but now having sort of an understanding of things are in motion and there are changes that are happening, and as we start to go through and look at the architecture and look at the technical things that we're doing, I can actually bring that back to the team with some guidance that, hey, we may want to look out for this, we may want to have not a closed door over here, we might want to make this a little bit extensible because there is change happening. There's some legislation that's in place, and it does actually impact the way we build things. Over here, sorry.
So just to be clear on the solution, you initially tried to approach all these product teams and you were trying to make them change, and then is what you did instead tell them, fine, you keep sending us the data the way you're sending it, we're going to put it into this big repository, we will wrap that repository with the appropriate legal and controls, and then if you want to access that data, we'll explain to you how you can get access to that in what framework. Is that kind of how you solve this problem?
Sort of. So because there were so many product offerings, I can't say that every one of them was exactly the same. But really what we worked towards was we're going to actually take the data raw, the way it is, right? So don't do anything. Don't decrypt. We may need the keys because some things we may want to decrypt. But let's just pull it in raw, and then we're going to actually stage it in an environment that is secure, that has very limited access. So we don't have access, all our scientists aren't traversing all that raw data. We'll have it in a secure blue hub is what we call it. We'll do all the classification, we'll do all the encryption, all the hashing, and then we'll actually decouple that to what we call our green hub where there's more access. So that's where we'll actually expose the access. So we separated the concerns, and we also alleviated the conversation and the negotiation, to be quite honest, between each product offering and what we need to do. So that's the way we went about it, made the change. Yep.
Obviously your client base would be global.
Yeah.
Not even just in terms of location, but in terms of their client base. Have you run into any conflict within various jurisdictions where you're trying to do business, where the regulatory regimes do not agree with each other, and you have to sort of guide your clients through that?
Yes.
How do you go in with that?
So if you know anything about Intuit, we're pretty new to our global expansion. So this is something that's very real and very painful to us. So the question is, as we move globally, and we have set up some rules as Bill just talked about, and you get into the different global jurisdictions, you will find very quickly that those jurisdictions may not agree with your analysis of those rules. And you need to be, to Bill's point, we can't really, we have to make our solutions extensible because we are constantly having to adjust. And so I would say that we're right there right now, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. And so I don't have a great answer. I just know that we're slugging it through, if that's fair. Just want to be honest.
I can tell you that technically the way that we've tried to separate that so we could still move forward is we've carved off sort of the platform and the big cloud picture to discrete products. So what we've done is we've taken data and parts of the platform that we can share securely through our different offerings globally, and we've deployed those discrete products for simple lookup services and profile services and some of the basics to just start to enable the product experiences, and not really tackled yet, how do we expose all of this data?
So I suppose a follow-on question for that, do you find that the legal discussions are driving your location of your data? So if you had a significant presence in, say, the Far East,
yeah.
Are you finding that you need to host in that region and virtualize over?
So the regional hosting has definitely come up, It hasn't impacted us directly yet. Some of the services that we have, so in AWS we have a couple geographically dispersed services for very simple non-PII lookups, and we have just dispersed those, but we haven't really got into the PII specific regionality yet. That's something that we have on our plate, and as Laura mentioned, as the public and private cloud, that becomes even more complex because it's really difficult, it's sometimes impossible for us to really control that.
But your question around is the legal considerations driving it. I think the legal considerations play a big role in strategically how do we go about this. I'm not sure I would say it's absolutely driving it, but it's, again, part of the takeoff. It's front and center to that. So it's a real good question.
A question over here, on the right side. So let me try to repeat the question. If someone wants to come into the process and develop have a new project, a new product on top of the data, so it's easier for us right now because all the data that we expose is internally to our product offerings or to our people. Period. So nothing that we have goes out to our developer network, or nothing goes out to partners, and we're not enabling any public access to our data. So that
so far.
Greatly so far. So that greatly simplifies it. But that being said, when a new product offering comes on, and say someone in the small business offering comes on and says, you know what, I'd like to have access to some consumer data, there's a process that we have where we partner with the legal team and say, okay, what are sort of the facts that you need from consumer that you want to actually merge with some small business insights, and we do go through a process where we just check the legality, the compliance, and the regulatory aspects of that, and then also who actually has the access to it.
Yeah, our compliance team has actually built an extraordinarily cool tool that is completely online, that you can maneuver around and say, you need data for this, what do you want to do with it, what product, and the rules pop up as you go. So it's a very robust tool to help people understand, here's what you can do and here's what you can't do, and it's all online. You don't really have to talk to anybody unless you kind of go down into a road where you get very thorny. Todd?
And back here? Oh, sorry.
Can you talk a little bit about the security models that you kind of emphasize on and evaluating? Just at a high level, given that you handle very, very sensitive data. Probably the most sensitive consumer data.
So everything right now, anything that is sensitive is in our private cloud, which doesn't necessarily mean it's safe, given everything in the past year and a half, but it's in our private cloud.
It does mean it's safe.
Yes, it does. So basics. All volumes are encrypted. All PII is encrypted. Access control is audited, and there are profiles that we have defined for different types of access control. So we are alerted if for example, a data scientist wants to see down to specific record level. That is something that's not allowed. It has to be an exception for that. So there are specific policies and procedures for that. Everything that is for the exposure, science teams aside, a lot of the science teams have more broader access than, say, the product teams. The product teams and the silos, what we've done initially is give them back their data, augmented with some third party and maybe some aggregations from some of the other offerings, but they don't have sort of untethered access to the entire platform today. To be perfectly honest, it's not something that I feel like we've completely, to Laura's point, to democratize the data across the organization. We don't have wide access where I can go into and say I want to see all the data across the different offerings today, and I can do that. It's very specific, and there's a manual process that's involved to allow that to happen.
Great. Are we out?
Yeah. Please join me in thanking Laura and Bill.
Okay. Thank you.